Let's start with music and chanting.
Okay. The way to perfection is narrow and steep.
The bypaths are many.
The pitfalls are deep. By theory alone, many think to arise. Here's one who could teach them if he were alive. A philosopher stepped into a boat, the river to cross would he. So learned was he thought no man could be half so clever as he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he.
To the boatman he said,
Good man, pray tell, of the German philosophers three, Schopenhauer, Hegel, and Goethe, Kant, whom you deem the wisest to be. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he.
My learned sir,
The boatman said,
I've not read your philosophers three. All day I'm obliged to ply these oars, to support my family and me.
Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. In that case, my good man, your fleeting life is as good as a quarter lost. Why, without the writings of those three men, not a shelf of books would I trust. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Now then, tell me, good man,
The scholar said,
have you studied the Frenchman Descartes?
I've told you before,
The other
I'm
cried,
unschooled. Hard work is my art.
Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Hard work? What a waste, sad foolish man. Half your life has been thrown away. Yet still a fragment might be redeemed. Memorize one theory a day. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Of a sudden a storm with raging might did lash that river to foam. Like a drifting pebble it tossed their boat till it seemed they'd never get home. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he.
My learned sir,
The boatman cried,
our chances are growing dim. 2 questions I put to you so far. You've put to me so far. Now I'll ask you one. Can you swim?
Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. I catch from a stroke,
The philosopher cried, as he clung in despair to an oar. Then the whole of your life is lost, my friend. You'll not need those books anymore.
Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a mighty scholar was he.
The boatman regrets to say his fare never reached the opposite bank. All that ponderous learning inside of his head gave him weight, you see, and he sank. Singing
Wise-o with his books-o, such a weighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a weighty scholar was he. La 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 la. Kind of a sing-along, you know. So it's kind of a sing-along.
Yeah, we couldn't hear you the first time.
And the lyrics are, it's sort of a kid's song, but it's for all of us. Lightly I fly as I live in laughter. Lightly I fly when my heart sings. Fling to the ground every heavy burden. Now I can soar up above the clouds. Lightly I fly when I live in laughter. Lightly I fly when my heart sings. Lightly I fly when I live in laughter. Lightly I fly when my heart sings. Fling to the ground every heavy burden. Now I can soar high above the clouds. Fling to the ground every heavy burden. Now I can soar up above the clouds. Lightly I fly when I live in laughter. Lightly I fly when my heart sings. Lightly I fly when I live in laughter. Lightly I fly when my heart sings. Fling to the ground every heavy burden. Now I can soar up above the clouds. Fling to the ground every heavy burden. Now I can soar up above the clouds. Lightly I fly when I live in laughter. Lightly I fly when my heart sings. Lightly I fly when I live in laughter. Lightly I fly when my heart sings. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart's song. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee. I will never forsake thee.
Let's just meditate for a couple of minutes. What shall we talk about?
I think it might be quite useful to speak a little about what it means to be a disciple, since it's such a big part of this path. That's one of the questions.
Any of your questions? Let's ask question. What does it mean to be a disciple?
Do you have a question? That is the
That was
question.
it. What does it mean to be a disciple?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what the scene is in New Zealand. I'm more familiar with it in America, and I'm not really sure what the misunderstandings and the delusions are, but I think they're similar here, because they are in other Western countries, Western English-speaking countries. In America, there's a big movement toward being spiritual. But what it more means is being living by good values and having ideals and being in tune with the planet and certain things like that. But in many circles, it's almost specifically not to be about God. That to be spiritual is not necessarily to be part of a greater reality, but people are trying to sort of co-opt that idea a little bit without having to also believe in God. And even if they can sort of think in terms of a greater reality, they don't want to have to actually put their own personal desires against the light of some higher force. To imagine that there's really something directing our lives that we really need to conform to, that there's more going on than just my ego preferences. And a lot of what people call spiritual is really just trying to impose their ego preferences on the world. I want you to pay more attention to the rainforest. I want you to be more tolerant of this. I want you. And so even though refined people may endorse the values, the actual energy behind it is not really spiritual in the sense of overcoming my ego identification. It's really just expanding my ego identification, getting everybody on my team. But it's still my own ideas about what ought to be. And it's well-meaning, but it's a little confused because you still don't have a string to pick it up by. So what this movement of self-realization is partly all about is just to really bring in a very open, devotional, this is what my life is about, energy. And Yogananda tried to shift it by talking about Divine Mother, so we're emphasizing more of the compassionate, loving, intimate aspect of God rather than the formal organization. So that's one aspect of what's missing, and the other aspect of what's missing in the whole spiritual scene, as far as I can see, is discipleship. And there's lots of gurus, but what's really missing is discipleship, which is, it's the same question essentially, which is who's really in charge, and how much can I be relied upon to really know what's right and best for me? And how much can I just self-declare that this is the reality that I want to be true, and therefore it must be true? These are my values, these are good values, these are the right values. I can be my own guru. I mean, we just make that up. Somebody just declares that. I can be my own guru. It's the most classic oxymoronic thing you could say. Because how do you know you can be your own guru? Are you wise enough to know that you can actually just run this yourself? Can we take all the wisdom of the ages and all the scriptures and all the ancient traditions and all common sense and just make another reality out of it because this is a new age and we want to? I was speaking about this the other Sunday about disciple guru. It's not guru disciple, it's disciple guru. And when you took that vow yesterday, Travis or Sunday when you heard it, all too long I've tried to do it my way and it just hasn't worked. I finally realized that without your love infusing me, without your guidance directing me, I just keep hitting a brick wall. And so discipleship is the realization that as bright and as capable and as creative and as dynamic and as effective as I can be, which you really have to be all of those things to be a good disciple, there's just a point where I don't have the perspective on myself or on reality sufficiently to know what to do next, that I need help. And that's really what the discipleship vow is. I've sought you for a long time, but it just didn't work, and now I need help. And so that's just the first step, to recognize the humility, to recognize your own limitation. And suddenly, or then, to be conscientiously and dynamically open to being guided. Not in an empty-headed way at all, but with great discrimination and great awareness that I'm serious now about wanting to transform myself. I'm not just play acting at spiritual growth where I call myself spiritual, but I really just keep doing what I like to do. And especially if we have high values and are generous by nature, you can go along that path for a long time. Be very helpful to people, feel like you're having a meaningful life, feel like you're living by true values, and there's nothing wasted there. But you're not really transforming yourself because it's almost impossible to transform yourself by yourself. It's because we just can't see ourselves clearly. I'm so amazed, the longer I'm on the path, how blind we can be to our own reality. No matter how conscientious we are, we're just too close to it. And it's too painful sometimes, or it's just too impossible. We just can't see it. And so when we crash up against that enough times, then just this a prayer of love goes up from earth and you responded. That's a line in the vessel of life. That I really genuinely need help. And I'm willing to humble myself to receive it. So that's the first part, and once that's in place, what will come to you is somebody capable of really guiding you. And depending on your karma is who you attract. Sometimes you attract a really powerful, true master. And sometimes you attract people who may seem to know more than you but don't really have that power yet. So eventually, in one lifetime or another, depending on your good karma and the intensity and the sincerity of your humility, then you'll just be put in relationship with true masters. And these are not the only true masters, but you'll be put in relationship with a true master, and you'll have the clarity of mind to recognize it, and you'll have the courage to do something about it. You see, those are a lot of steps. Mm-hmm. You can be brought in contact for many incarnations, but won't recognize it, won't have the clarity to know what to do, or won't have the courage to follow it. Will be discouraged by your family or by society or by your own fears. And you just move through these various stages until finally you realize that I really, really deeply, and without doubt, need help. I just can't go any farther. And then you get the chance to become acquainted with the vibrations, because a master like Yogananda, he has a face, he has a lineage, but it's really a vibration. And you sort of just recognize that vibration. That's why I've said in several contexts, oftentimes you recognize the disciples before you recognize the master. I mean, as your own. You just meet people who they just vibrate according to the way you do or want to vibrate. And then you trace it back and realize where it's coming from. Many times people have said to me, oh, well, I really like what you say, but I just don't tune into Swami Kriyananda. I say, you couldn't possibly like me without liking Swami Kriyananda. It's just not possible, because absolutely everything I'm offering you is what he told me. And if you like hearing it from me, then you would like hearing it from him. But it's also true that that's how it works. I've said many times, I didn't feel attuned to Yogananda, but I felt so attuned to Kriyananda. And he told me that this is where it was coming from. So I gave Yogananda much more serious attention. But still, most of my life has been through Kriyananda. And I still take Yogananda a little bit. I take his word for it. Yeah.
Can you talk about what the disciple-guru relationship entails?
It's an inward relationship. It's a recognition. Well, it's something that I'm such a neophyte learning it in real terms. It's the realization that you're never alone. That there's just always an inner companion on a very subtle level. And you begin to look back over many experiences of your life, and there was no other visible presence, and you realize there was always a presence. And that it's like a hum. It's like an om that's always going on inside of you, that is attuned to the right vibration in every situation. And as you learn to listen to that, it begins in a sort of automatic way. Not automatic, not in the sense of not commitment on your part, but you begin to recognize that the more you align yourself with that vibration, the happier you are, the better everything goes. And whenever things are not going well and you look, you realize you've unaligned yourself with that vibration. It has many other qualities to it, but it becomes a consistent source of wisdom in your life, a consistent source of teaching, a reference point for everything else that you learn. Is it consistent with Master's teachings? It's very good once you become deep on a path to try to focus as much as possible exclusively on that path. It's not good to be too fanatical about it, but I'm often amused when people say, oh, you'll really like this book. It's almost the same as Master's teachings. Mm-hmm. And I say, well, if it's almost the same, why would I read it? If I have Master's teachings, and that works for me, why would I want to read things just because they're almost the same? But I've come to that over, I have to be honest about this, I read a lot of traditions, but what I read is biographies and stories of saints in every tradition. But when I really want to understand a philosophical point, it's not that I've never learned from any other source, because I have, but I usually find that this is the most satisfying way to learn it, and I measure it against that. What did Master say? What did Swami write? And it's not that no one else is true, but I like the way they say it. And it's much less confusing to me to be able to just tread one path and weigh other things against it, instead of always be trying to match this to this and match this to this. Last week, remember, Matthew or someone was trying to get me to relate to whole other realities, and I just wouldn't do it. I couldn't do it. To him, I didn't suggest that he not study those things, because he's just looking around, and whatever works for him right now is really great. But recently a man who's really much more committed was talking to me even about other disciples of this line of teaching, or a certain guru who purported to be following this, and he was presenting to me all these contradictions. And I, to my own surprise, said, why are you reading those things and asking me to reconcile? You have your path. Why would you be reading something, even if it's purported to be from the same line? Why are you doing that? And because in his case, he was just diluting his attunement. But in Matthew's case, it's quite appropriate, because he's shocking. He doesn't have any idea yet where he belongs. So he needs to figure out where he belongs. You just have a sense that this is right for me. Now, I have to say also truly, when I met Swami Ananda in 1969, I was very devoted to Ramakrishna, who's a great avatar of the 1800s in India, a true master. And Yogananda had enormous regard. He's a true master. His disciple Vivekananda, I never met him, even about the books and the stories. And I was very, that's what brought me up to the path, was Vivekananda. And I was very devoted. I never took initiation or anything, that never occurred to me to do it. It just didn't. But I was very deeply guided by Ramakrishna. It was a true relationship. And when I met Swami Kriyananda, I was so just utterly magnetized, as I've said, to just go where he was and do what he did, whatever it was. But there was this sort of slight thought in the back of my mind, what about Ramakrishna? Where does it all fit together? But I knew that the masters are not competing for the greatest number of disciples. That if an opportunity like learning from Swamiji was given to me, and I felt so drawn to it, I simply had to take it. Just integrity demanded that I had to take it, and I couldn't be too picky about the details. And what I literally said, I said to Yogananda and to Ramakrishna, I said, all right, you guys, you figure it out. And I never gave it another thought. But I dove completely into what Kriyananda was offering me, the life at Ananda, and then he gave me Kriya initiation, and I took it all without any hesitation. And after about a year, maybe a year, I just woke up one morning and realized that I didn't know the word at the time, but Ramakrishna was my Upa Guru. Upa Guru means a true guru who takes you a certain distance, but then delivers you to where you really belong. And so that made completely legitimatize my relationship with him, and as a true one. but it wasn't where I would stay forever, which, as it occurs to me, I never took initiation or anything like that. Even if I had, it wouldn't have mattered. And then I was, of course, I was exactly where I belonged, but I couldn't tell at the beginning because I didn't have the intuition to know. And if I had held back from immersing myself, I never would have developed the intuition to know. You see? And I somehow knew that. I knew that if I just waited on the sidelines and waited till it was clear, it would never become clear. Because what was I doing to clarify things? But by diving in with sincerity, then I would develop myself enough that I would be able to see what I couldn't see in the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I have further questions.
Sure.
So when you mentioned that that inner feeling that you have as your relationship with the Guru,
Yes.
how is that different from your connection to God?
It's more specific and more personal and more dynamic and less subject to creative interpretation, less subject to subjective misunderstanding, less subject to the ego's confusion, because there's a real consciousness there actively working for you. It's not that there's no, and plus all the scriptures say that the Guru is essential. That God does not act directly, that God acts through instruments, and the Guru is essential. Now, you don't have to accept that as true, but it's, the Guru has a face, the Guru has eyes, the Guru has teachings, the Guru has disciples you can relate to, the Guru has a personality. It just takes this great impersonal God and just brings it down to something you can see more clearly. Just like, everybody wants love, but you meet somebody and that really begins to bring out of you. You get to practice much more dynamically when things become specific and personal. And it's just part of that realization that loving God is not enough, I need more help. And then you begin to feel that this is someone who really knows and can help me. I mean, that's what I felt with Ananda's books, that's what I felt with Ramakrishna, but just way, way more with Swami Kriyananda. This man can really help me. And that's what Swami said he felt with Yogananda. And many people feel, they just see, I mean, you don't have to feel it, or they see Babaji, or they see Jesus. You just feel, this one can really help me. You can't fake that, it has to be sincere. And when it comes to you, you just know. And you know that it's different, that it's taken the general and it's made it mine. It's made it very personal for me. God is infinite and also infinitesimal. And that's the principle behind it, but the experience has to be your own. It's falling in love in the best possible way, because your love will be more than requited, and there will never be betrayal, or disappointment, or disillusionment, cooling of ardor, all the things that happen with human life. Does anyone have anything to add to that? I mean,
So the Guru is the teacher, is the avatar.
You can say all those words. Who is your best friend? And that friendship is vibrational as well as personal. I have just countless actual in-life experiences with Swami Kriyananda. I was wearing that scarf the other day, and we said it was pretty, and I didn't tell her the whole story of being in Taormino, Sicily, in the store where we bought it, and just the whole thing, but I'm wearing it. And it has, to me, this huge human history behind it. But that's just one innumerable examples. And I enjoyed all of that. Swamiji was he was a delightful friend. Just the most delightful. Absolutely entertaining in every situation and uplifting. But that's not the relationship. The relationship has always been this clear reference point in my own heart. That's why I called it like the Om. It's just the clear bell of right consciousness around which everything is measured. And much of that teaching and vibration actually came through his person, but it never was his person. It was always that vibration underneath. I listened to him speak once, actually, in our temple. I'm sure you were there. And I think I was particularly tuned in that night. I was conscious of the fact that all he was putting into the room was a vibration of consciousness. That he put the vibration out first, and then after he put out the vibration, he put words on it so that we could receive it. But I've never really felt it quite so clearly that the words came after. That he was giving something else first, and then he gave his words. Because I so enjoyed his words, I didn't always notice that. So that's why it doesn't matter if you never knew him, whoever it is, because it's the vibration is. But then you'll hear a voice, you'll just, or you hear a voice in your own mind that you just know is not your own mind. Not always, but often enough. And you just then it's a slow build. It's a deep love relationship does not come cheap. It takes you have to be really committed to it. That's why you don't want to confuse yourself with, dating this, going out with this one today and that one tomorrow and this one over here and this one when it suits you, because you never really get that bond. And that's the reason for focus. It's not because somebody's wrong or right. It's just that it's just confusing if you're trying to love deeply and you've got too many folks hanging around to build a really close bond. It's too subtle.
I'm really glad to hear you just say that it builds.
Oh yeah.
Because initially I had a deep feeling for Swami Ananda, and then the others are developing and growing as my devotion grows. And is that, because when you met Swami, it was like this, and
It was very lucky.
For me, it's been growing.
Oh, but even then it grows and grows. And I heard Swami say at the end of his life, oh, if only I could go back and be with Master now. If I could only be with him now, knowing what I know. And I've been doing this project of reading through all the notes I took for all these years. And some of it has actually been very painful for me. It has not, and by any means, been a joy, all of it. Most of it. I miss so much. I made so many, I can't really speak of it. But I wish I could go back with what I know now. It would have been so much better. But I'm comforted by the fact that I just want to say that. And that would always be true. And really, you would want it always to be true. You would feel badly if it wasn't true, really. It would be worse if it weren't true. It just can't be forced. And all you have to do, you just take the corner that you know and behave completely sincerely. Like when I was living at Ananda, and I said, and I asked Swamiji if I could have Kriya. I really didn't know if he'd give it to me or not. Give me the initiation or not. One of 1,000 reasons why I might not be qualified. Because I really wasn't even sure where he stood. He didn't even hesitate. Because he could see me more clearly than I could see myself. Of course, I had the personal opportunity, but it got to be a joke. The most classic day was when he said, "How are you, Asha?" I said, "I don't know, sir. How am I?" that became my answer when he would ask me, "I don't know. What do you think?" On that particular day, he said, "I'm worried about you." I said, "I'm worried about myself." I was in this vortex. It wasn't going so great. Okay. You're the one with the questions, then?
I can keep
You just keep
Yeah,
going.
go on. Good questions.
I've been compiling a list.
Well, you answered one of mine.
Yeah.
Do you want to go?
Pardon?
Would you?
The discipleship, I was just going to ask about that. It's quite fitting that we just had it.
Do you want to ask something else?
No, I just wanted to sort of clarify too that I had Uber Guru too for the first 6 years of my pursuit in the spiritual path. I kind of feel weird now because I had so much reverence built up from that point in time And then I kind of think, well, it's not like the gurus have a competition going with each other.
Exactly.
As long as you're loyal to to your lineage, there's nothing wrong with being a devotee, so to speak, as well as a disciple. Is that right? Or?
Well, Upaguru is a very specific thing. And,
Yeah.
and like the way I described it, perhaps also for you, I've heard you speak of, what has helped you get to this point.
Yeah.
And yes, there's no competition, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
And you never lose reverence. But you may still draw your primary inspiration and guidance and teaching
Yeah.
from the source that you're now loyal to.
Yeah.
Just because they appear to contradict each other, and the attunement is very subtle.
Yeah.
Each master, and that's why you have to also look to the disciples. They just vibe very, very differently. I've been around enough ashrams and seen enough disciples, and you can be very close, but they're just different one from another.
Yeah.
And that's because they've aligned themselves with that particular ray. That's why Swami was called this a ray. This is a ray of the divine. It's one sun, but it comes out in many rays.
Yeah.
And the picture that Swami often drew was if you have a big frozen lake and you want to get through the thick ice down to the lake underneath, you can't get there by just patting it all over the place.
Yeah.
You have to find one spot and you have to drill down deep through that. Once you break through, you're all in the same lake.
Yeah.
But you just simply, and you can argue against that as much as you want. All teachers are the same, it's all the same. Go ahead, how's that working for you? It's just like, it's not a dogma, it's an experience. And I still draw inspiration from Sri Ramakrishna. When we went to India and went to his places, I mean, it was and still is some of my most favorite places in India are related to his life. But interestingly, Sri Yogananda had deep experiences with Ramakrishna too.
Yeah.
So there's a very strong link. But still, I don't go there. I read inspiring books about disciples because all stories about saints inspire.
It's the same for me, and that's why I feel that connection. And I guess reverence probably wasn't the right word.
No, reverence is a fine word.
Yeah.
Reverence is a very appropriate word. You can find many beautiful souls in the world, but you still have your own.
Because I think Paramahansa Yogananda did say, if you liked my autobiography, you liked my vibration.
Yes,
And I think
exactly.
that's what you fell in love with, is my vibration.
That's what he said to Swamiji when Swami said, how did you like my book? And Swami spoke about it, and Master said, that's because it has my vibrations.
Yeah.
And Swami thought vibrations were like something that you stood on the floor and the floor shook.
Yeah.
He never even considered the word before.
Yeah.
Because that's an accurate statement. And the vibration is everything you see, because that's all we're ever experiencing is certain vibrations of consciousness. So when he says vibrations in it, it means it has his presence in it. Because there's no physical body anymore.
Yeah.
So what you're receiving is his ray of consciousness. Subtle words, but it becomes so vivid. And you find yourself in and out of tune at different times. You're like, when said, I'm worried about you. I was just off. And I've been off many times. Certainly it's not happened a lot more than once. And I just sort of trace back and realize I've lost the vibration. And you have to do whatever you have to do to find it again. And on a daily basis, an hourly basis, a year, whatever it might be, it's a real one. And if you're constantly bringing in all these other vibrations, you just don't know which one you're supposed to follow. And pretty soon you're not really going anywhere. You're having a good time,
Yeah.
but you're not going deep. You're just moving around the lake. Because also when they take you, we're talking about you taking them, but they also have to take you.
They should be responsibility.
And they're not going to take that responsibility if you're just playing around.
It is like a relationship, like a marriage,
Right.
And even if you're married, if you're just kind of all in your own head instead of relating consciously to the other person, you feel off somehow, even though you may think you're doing a cool thing or the right thing or whatever, but it feels off. It's like, okay, so what do I need to do back there, however long it takes.
I would put it the other way. Marriage is a very dim shadow of the guru-disciple relationship, but it's sufficient because marriage is one lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, you may marry more than one lifetime, but as soon as you die, it's over. Where's this relationship?
Yeah.
As Master says in that, whatever thing we've all read, or many of us have read, lovers promise themselves eternal, fidelity, but the moon laughs at their bleached bones on the beach. It's just so cynical. Who can really love you through the ages? It's true. Oh God, it's just like, it's chilling, but it's the truth. We practice in the human life. We practice for the divine relationship because we need to practice. We need to make it concrete. That's what tomorrow's subject is. We need to make it concrete. We need to be challenged. But we're practicing for this. Does Master say that on a tape or is that only before? I think he says it on the recording, doesn't he? The moon laughs, the bleached bones or something like that. I don't know, but I just heard it when I heard it.
There's a big moon out there behind you.
So did you have more questions? Just run through your list.
Yeah.
Seems like the evening was set up for you, so that's
great.
Thanks, guys, for coming to my party.
Thanks for great so far.
I think you're just asking the same questions.
You just
probably.
figured out tea kettles so I love more.
That was good to hear. So what exactly is a self-realized master?
All of us, when we use the pronoun I, it's completely attached to the body we're living in, isn't it? You just can't say I and really, theoretically, you can say lots of things. In the early years of Ananda, we used to get some really charming characters, and there was this one woman who called herself Mushroom, just as Thank you. Who called herself Mushroom, and she always referred to herself as this unit of consciousness, which she was a character and a half. This unit of consciousness. And she would never say the pronoun I, and she would always, vaguely refer to this unit of consciousness. But it was, to us, just a delightful facade. And she was actually kind of a fun person, just kind of wacky. There's a lot of room for wacky. But she identified completely with that body. She was just affirming that she was not. And it was a fair game. It was still, everything about her, she wasn't equally in all bodies. She wasn't able to completely sacrifice herself and be satisfied with someone else's satisfaction. Just all of those different things. All of us are identified and compelled by the unique karmic knots that we're still untying. We draw our happiness from many external sources, and we are vulnerable to suffering from many external sources. All of us have people we're attached to, and the thought of losing them is very painful. It puts us immediately into a state of suffering. We suffer for people around the world. We have anxieties about ourselves. We have fears. We have misunderstandings. We have things that block our energy. We miscalculate. We misunderstand. And we make the list that's really long. Now that's what it is not to be self-realized. To be self-realized is to have resolved to draw your happiness entirely from inside, to be utterly invulnerable to suffering. Now bear in mind, and I have tried to say this, when you incarnate, you play the part of an involved human being, but as Master put it, in your heart you're always free. You have this inner reality that is never touched. And you live in all consciousnesses. You don't simply live in your own. Like Master said, he stumbled because he said literally, I couldn't remember which body I'm supposed to keep going. Ananda Ma, who was a highly advanced soul, when Yogananda asked her, she says, I was born, I was the same, I was a young girl in my village, I was the same, I was married, I was the same, as I stand before you now, I am the same. That she participated, and she was very dynamically involved in the world around her. I read a number of books about her, and she was completely engaged. She cooked, she cleaned, she took care of her relatives, she solved domestic disputes, she played with the children, she just did everything. But inside, it was always the same reality to her. Nothing that happened ever touched her actual inner experience. And they say when she was born, she didn't cry, she didn't fuss. And later she said, oh, well, I was just, they talked about it, she just lay there and sort of looked out the window. And she says, yes, there were beautiful trees out the window when I was watching them. That was when she came out of the womb, because she was the same. So a master like Yogananda, also we are compelled to be born because we have all these desires that give us no peace. We can't just merge into the infinite because we have all these contrary vibrations going on. I want this, I don't want this, I worry about this, I resent this, I regret this. All of these imbalances that all have to be worked out, and they push us, they're magnets, literally. They pull us. Yogananda, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. He had no vritis, nothing. But he had compassion. And for the sake of all the rest of us, he just took a bodily image with us. Swami Kriyananda was nearly that, not entirely, but nearly that. He commented once to me that essentially what he said was that there was no difference between his subconscious and his conscious mind. That there was nothing in his chakras. In other words, that he was always the same in every reality. So in brief terms, that's what it means. There's lots of other ways to say it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I guess just to build on that, how does that level of consciousness allow the self-realized master to, I don't know how to say this, I guess to allow us to connect with God?
How does it help us to?
Or are they even doing that? Or are they just helping us clear our vrittis so that we can...
Oh no, that's more accurate. What they're doing is they're transforming us into them.
Okay.
They're making us care. They're not. I mean, their necessary intermediary state is not because we're incapable of having a direct relationship with God. It's that we have impediments to that direct relationship. And their assistance is necessary to free us of those impediments. But it's not like a Catholic dogma where the priest is a necessary intermediary between you and God,
Right.
which is a very important distinction, enormously important distinction. Or even a church will make itself a necessary intermediary. I don't know Catholicism, and it's an awfully big target, but recently I remember when the Pope, before the one we have now, who's the Pope now? Francis, right. Benedict, the one before. And they didn't like him. Our friends in Italy didn't like him. They called him whatever he was, B12. He was a Bible. I just always called him Ratzinger because he just was such an unpleasant man, and that was such a good name for him. But it was also actually his name. As I understood it, they were trying to put out this "we respect everyone" sort of thing. They respect everything because of their compassion for the fact that until they're Catholics and accept Jesus Christ, they'll never be saved. So that the church itself becomes, you've got to be a Catholic in order to be saved. And that's just complete wrong. Because every soul has a direct relationship with God. The Master simply helps you to achieve that. Helps you to become self-realized because it's very hard to untie your own knots because you're just too close into them. You need to be above them to see. Because even for example, I'll use this, there was a psychic woman. Psychics are not gurus, but this woman who was, I was endeavoring to draw her more deeply into the spiritual path. My efforts were somewhat misguided as it happened. I didn't perceive her clearly. But she went to a psychic, and the psychic told her that she needed to do this and this and this, which was basically to follow all the worldly desires that she had, that I was trying to encourage her to redirect into devotion and service. But the psychic insisted that she had to do those things. I said, well, the psychic is reading your own mind because those are the things you want to do. But the psychic is not wise enough to know whether those are the things that will actually help you spiritually. Because you can feel sometimes very in tune with things, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's just that when you have the Guru's vibration to compare it to, you can make a good choice or a better choice. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't, in fact, follow all of that pathway. And I can't say to this day whether the woman in question did the wrong thing by taking the path she took. I don't have the capacity to perceive. But I was not persuaded that the psychic who advised her had the capacity to perceive either. That's the difference between a guru and even a good friend. Is that sometimes, for example, you can have very strong karma in a certain direction, but it's not going to help you spiritually follow it. You may feel compelled to do it, but it also might be possible for you to go around that karma and not have to just live through it. There was someone once who wanted to get married, and Swamiji strongly advised them not to do so. And they did anyway, and then came back and sort of said to Swami, "See, I am happy," like that. And he was gracious about it. And they didn't really do it exactly like that, but it was close to me. And after the person left, Swami said, "I never said she wouldn't be happy." Meaning that wasn't the point. The point was whether it was a necessary karma for her spiritually. And in fact, in the end, it didn't work out. But he was making a distinction so I would understand. Just because you're enjoying it doesn't mean it's good for you spiritually. And that's partly, I think I was talking about discipleship. You can't just tell that what we used to call the feels good school of spirituality. Feels good is not the same as spiritual. It's important to realize feels bad is not the same as spiritual either. That's why you need the vibration. Because then you just have a little more shortcut.
It's almost like a true friend tells you sometimes something you don't want to hear,
Exactly.
but it's for your own interest.
That's exactly right. But the masters, the thing you have to understand is the masters will never tell you more than you want to hear. Because what is the point? Our friends are always telling us more than we want to hear. But the master won't. He'll tell you just exactly what you want to hear. Toward the end of Swamiji's life, he became, well, it's a story in the book I wrote about him, that there was a man who was close to him, and Swamiji was very stern with him. And then later, he didn't apologize, but he explained. He said, I feel a certain urgency now. This was in the last decade of his life. I feel a certain urgency now, he said, to help you all as much as I can. He said, before, I could just tell you a little and then wait 10 years or so before I told you more. He said, but I don't have that kind of time now. He sort of said, I hope you don't mind. So, amazing when you think about it. He said Master actually very rarely told him very much. He could have explained everything to them, and he rarely said, he never sat someone down and said to him, now Zeb, let me tell you, these are the qualities that you have, this is what you need to work on, and this is why you have it. He said Master never, ever went anywhere near that. He said he would give you a sentence. He said sometimes he would just look at you. Because if you couldn't come to it from your own intuitive understanding, it really wasn't going to be yours anyway. It wasn't a question of just feeding it into your mind. And he would just guide you into the right circumstances so that your own understandings would come to you. That's the basic idea of not really caring whether the situation was difficult or pleasant, because it's the one you need in order to understand things. And I've certainly learned a lot from the things that didn't go right.
Is that how my conflict is, how do you know if it's intuitive, knowing that sense of, compared to your ego? How do you?
You learn from experience, and that's all. You have to have the courage to risk, and you have to have the humility to put everything behind it with a humble attitude that I'm trying this to see if it's going to be true. And sometimes true guidance still doesn't work out, so success or failure is not the key, but true guidance tends to work out. And you gradually, from experience, become familiar with what it feels like when it's really super conscious, and you begin to be able to tell the difference. And there is something that Master called semi-superconscious, where it's sort of a good idea, and it sort of has to play itself out. Swamiji was never dogmatic about things. We just go in what seemed like a good direction. And the other thing is that you don't sell the farm and put the children in boarding school and just go off.
Yeah.
You take it a step and see how it feels. You take it a step and see how it feels. And certainly, I guess that's the only thing I'd say. You learn. You learn if you want to learn. If you're humble enough to really want to learn and honest enough to notice. I once was part of this project. It was a fundraising project. And it was a multi-phase project, and someone else was in charge of one part. It did really well, and then it was my turn. I freely admit in retrospect that I got competitive and wanted to be better than that person. So I did my whole project, which failed miserably. I just made really bad errors of judgment. And after it was all over, somebody said to me like this, yes, he said, Asha, whenever your ego gets involved, you make terrible decisions. Which I've always remembered because I knew it, I could feel it all the way through. I just wasn't paying attention. And so that was a very good example of just not tuning in properly. And so I've always kept that in the back of my mind. I can tell what it feels like when I'm out to prove something. Too eager, too this, too that. And not a million times in my life, but a few times in my life, I've just, as close as I can say, I heard the voice of God, and I knew it was right. One time when that happened to me, I became very egoic about it. And I started arguing with everyone and just made enemies all the way down the line, trying to force my will on a whole lot of other people. When I realized that was happening, I wrote a letter to all those involved, and I said, because I had to be honest, even if the inspiration I had for the direction of this project was in fact true guidance, I feel that I've corrupted that now with my egoic attachment to it. So I withdraw from this decision completely. Interestingly, after all the dust settled, it came back to exactly what I thought we should have done, which did not give me any particular satisfaction, but it did help me understand the difference between true inspiration and egoic involvement in actual inspiration. So subsequently, when I had that kind of a feeling, I tried not to, and I was not always successful, to fight for it so egoically. I tried to have more faith in it. That if this is Swami would say to me, truth doesn't need you to defend it. If this is true, other people will see it. And you present it more humbly, and that gives everyone a chance to come to it. You just learn. I was involved in a very big thing. It was quite controversial. But it came to me in such a way that I had no doubt about it. And it got so controversial that I was talking to Swami about what we should really do. And he sort of said, he presented to me all the concerns that everyone had, and I just said, sir, none of those fears are going to come to me. And then I finally said, Swami, it just, as I said to him, it came to me in that way. I said, and it came to me in that way, I know, it's going to work. Oh, he said, of course. That's the only time I've ever claimed that. But in fact, it was true. But because it did come that way, which I learned to recognize, and even in the midst of all the controversy, I stayed pretty centered. Because it just was so certain that I didn't need to fight for it. I just knew that it would just roll itself across from itself.
So it's a question about relating to other people, like you mentioning you had a clear direction of the project, but then what was missing was, working harmoniously with others. So how do others fit into our self-realization?
Well, whenever my ego gets involved in my terrible decisions. And, but not all true intuitions are accepted. Swami Ananda had many over the years that were just too dim-witted to grasp. And he just would have to drop them. because they weren't timely. He was correct, but they weren't timely. Nobody could take it. I mean, he was amazing that way. It was like he knew it was true, but if we weren't ready for it, well, there you have it. You know, not everything that God intends will happen in this world because people aren't going to call for it.
But it's almost as though to him or to a master, other people's needs or realities
Capacity to accept is part of the equation, right?
is more important than their own.
It's very subtle because sometimes you do have to stand up. I mean, Swamiji on many occasions has told people, you know, if you think you're right, don't give up. I mean, he's just been emphatic, don't give up. And I would say, well, but Swami, I'm so emotional about it. It doesn't matter. If you think you're right, don't give up. And you know, he would have preferred, you know, this is the poignancy that I'm reading, he would have preferred that I was calm in my conviction. But he still told me, even if you're upset, if you think you're right, don't give up. I mean, that was amazing. He said that to many people. Stand by it if you think it's true. And he talked about somebody that he had to work with who was very forceful. And he said, I don't always find it convenient, but I admire it. He said, but once that person is convinced that I really have heard it, and if I do reject it, then they'll give up immediately. But they will not give up until they're certain. He said, and I admire it. And he didn't, because it's you here that's being developed. And you have to have the courage of your convictions, and you have to have the nerve to be wrong. If you don't have the nerve to be wrong, you never learn anything. You always just play it safe, and you never go anywhere. I mean, the catastrophes in our community over many years I'm always of two minds because the great souls you see around you are hard won. Their success is hard won, and I don't really want to say you should have seen him win, but all of us, anybody that you admire now has been through a lot. So I always say to people when they goof up, just lift your chin up and look everybody straight in the eye, and in 2 days it'll be over. But if you make a complex of it and withdraw, then you'll have a problem for decades. You'll never get over it. But everybody's been there. It's a joke, but it's money in the bank to forgive everybody else their foibles. So I say, you today, me tomorrow. I mean, Ananda is an extraordinary fellow, I have to say. Really extraordinary. Example from someone. He just taught us to accept and forgive ourselves and everything. You know, it's just delusion. What can you say?
Alright, let's see what's next. Written them all down. Yeah, because otherwise I would forget it. Okay, it's a long one. What makes Ananda Yoga different from every other yoga path out there? Is there a distinct difference in terms of philosophy? Or just different meditation techniques that were taught by Yogananda?
Well, all true paths are the same. The phrase is Sanatana Dharma, which I put up on the board once. Sanatana Dharma is that which is. And all paths, I mean, I use the word true paths because there's a lot of people who just make things up. They're not God realized, they're just making it up. But all true masters are consistent with Sanatana Dharma. But then it has a flavor for the times. I mean, the fact that Jesus is in the middle of the altar and is considered to be one of the gurus, and that Master himself says emphatically that this is, he called it the second coming of Christ, and which, you know, is really quite a statement. But what he meant was it was the resurrection of Jesus' true teachings. And that even though there appear to be inconsistencies between what Krishna taught and what Jesus taught, they both go back to Sanatana Dharma, and the inconsistencies were brought in later. So that's why we pray to saints and sages of all religions, because they're all teaching the same thing. But since we already had the long discussion about discipleship, you can't at the same time follow all paths because you'll never get to the top of the mountain. But that doesn't mean that there aren't many ways to get there. And it's just, every snowflake is different. Every one of us is different. We form relationships over many, 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 many lifetimes, and we just belong in certain vibrations. But the essential teachings, if the teachings actually are different, they should be a little suspect. Because how can human nature be different? There's just certain ways, the chakras and the kundalini and the spiritual eye and the devotion and all of it, it has to come out the same. And the flavor of this is the flavor of this particular ray. It's like a stained glass window, is how they often say. Same sunshine comes through, but different color panes look different when you look at it. And you're just naturally attracted to something. Our path is very devotional. Our path is very practical. Our path is funny. And others, are just more austere. I mean, just as an example, they're more austere or various other things. There's ashrams where everybody's very more silent and more withdrawn. Swami was never like that. Or monastic, entirely monastic. Some paths are entirely monastic, and our path is not. You can be a household, you can raise children, you can be completely dedicated without having to be formally renunciate, or you can be a renunciate. So that's a very nice feature. In self-realization fellowship, which is the same as Yogananda's, still Yogananda's path, all the responsibility is really in the hands of monastics. You can't teach for them unless you're in a monastic order. Whereas the Ananda branch of self-realization, householders is equal with monastics. That's a big deal. And in SRF, if you don't stay in the monastery, you cannot have the same level of involvement in the organization or the religious life. Whereas in Ananda, people live a monastic life sometimes for a time, and then it becomes time for them to be in the household or the opposite. And you can move, you can follow what you need to do without feeling that you're suddenly on the outside. Which is great freedom because it allows people to be more sincere. You don't have to hold to a certain lifestyle because you would lose everything if you shifted. And then you may lose your vocation, but you dare not give up your position. So Ananda's been able to be much more authentic.
Which seems like that's what Lahiri was, and also Swami Sri Teshwar, both.
Well, these are notable facts. That's why we are the way we are. Yeah. This is just a choice that they made. But what Ananda is what you see. You've only just met us, but I think this is a fairly representative little crowd here. This is our story. You'll just run into more of us.
Those who can carry a tune and those who can't.
It doesn't mean that you're not in tune. But as a group, we're a pretty good singers. But actually, that's not a small part of it. We're very creative, we're very artistic, we're very musical. We all look like Kriyananda. In Satchidananda's ashram, he was actually a mechanic. And older people can fix machines. Really? I mean, at least when he was alive, I don't know if it's still true. But he had a lot of mechanically minded, practical people like that. And Swami Ananda's just filled with poets and writers and singers and painters. And it's just part of our bhav. Actors, but part of our bhav is to be creative. Creative self-expression is a really integral part of the Ananda path. Whereas in many spiritual paths, it may even be discouraged. Whereas in our path, it's just part of how we live. I mean, it's like, we joke about it. When Swami wrote the blessing for the food, when we started singing the blessing, it really cinched the Ananda life is like living in an operetta. We sang the goodbye, we sang the blessing. All we need to do is jump up and start the group dance on the tables, and we were all singing.
I must say though, you'll find it very rare to find anyone else with such a presence online too, though. I mean, we have a huge technology capability.
With that too, but we're also very giving. Just enormous, just we give away what we sell. It's just our, all these are characteristics, whereas in some paths, you work on your own self-realization. And you can give a great deal without ever leaving your room. But it's just we have a mission, we have this job to do, we have the word to spread, and here we are, good old sitting here. Those are all characteristics, but that doesn't make the teaching different. That makes the way different. I mean, one of the reasons that I liked Swami Kriyananda so much, why I was so drawn to him, was that he was building this retreat in the mountains. And immediately he was inviting everybody in the room to just come up and spend the weekend and help build it. And because it was very important to me, it was deeply important to me, that that I really wanted to help other people. I wanted to give other people something meaningful, rather than have it be meaningful, which was a big flaw. But the fact that he also was completely engaged in trying to create for others was just thrilling to me. Whereas somebody else would be completely put off by that because they might really know that their path was solitary and solitude, and they would just want to, go somewhere and be a hermit. It's a perfectly valid path. But it isn't the main part of it. And so far we don't have any. Swamiji hoped for them. His original plan was that he would have a small community of hermits and they would all just
Or maybe you have really good hermits, that's why you don't know.
That's why I had to stop and think. Very secret hermits. But when I said something to Swamiji about meditation or, being all about service and not meditation, he corrected me very seriously. He said there's a great deal of service meditation. I mean, he knew it. I wasn't. And as soon as he said it, that was a remark I made about 1973. But he corrected me strongly. Don't be confused here. Don't think you know everything that's going on.
And I guess just to build on that, are you laughing or am I asking you a question? So if there is this high degree of similarity between the paths, or if their direction is the same, why is there a need to keep some of the teachings secret until someone signs on to a path?
First, let me say it more clearly. No, the teachings are not all similar at all. They can be very, very different from one another in the expression of them. I said the essential truth underneath them is the same. And in all true religions, the goal is the same. But most religions are completely corrupted, and by now, and whatever essential revelation was there has been totally confused by the institutions that own them and have reinterpreted them and whatever the word is, degraded them. The reason you don't make all teachings available is because people they're not capable of understanding it. Why don't you teach first graders calculus? Because they don't have any idea what to do with it. And you would give it to them and they would just feel discouraged, or they wouldn't have the foggiest idea what they were being taught. You have to move people progressively through stages. And if you're going to get to subtle things that are very powerful, you have to have some context for them. Otherwise, for example, let's create initiation, which is, almost everything in Ananda is open to everyone. And in our temple, we have a few things that require some prerequisites to enter or some qualification to enter. But almost everything is open to everyone, because almost everything happens on multiple levels simultaneously. And you can just come in and you'll take from it what you're capable of receiving. But Kriya initiation specifically, because it is a personal practice that you have to do in order to be able to do it successfully, as a service to the people who are learning, and it comes with this tremendous promise of effectiveness. So as a service to the people who are receiving it, you have to make sure that they have some capability to fulfill within themselves the promise of what they're receiving. Because if you give it to people before they're qualified for it, it won't work for them because they won't know how to use it. They won't be regular enough in their meditation, or disciplined enough in their practice, or refined enough in their consciousness, or devoted enough as disciples. And you'll hand them this great technique, which some people do. People take the same Kriya, and you come for the weekend and you walk away and you've got Kriya initiation. Almost no one who gets it that way actually practices it. And not only do you have slightly not so good karma of having promised to do something you can't do, which one in a position such as mine of responsibility, you have to help people not make vows they're going to break. That's not good karma for them, and you don't want to be part of that. And the second thing is they'll say, oh, I tried to create it, it didn't work. And that's also irresponsible, to put people in a position to misjudge something. And how long is that going to last? How many incarnations is that going to carry on? So it's just irresponsible. It's not out of any lack of desire for people to have it. And so therefore, we have all these different ways in which people can simply fulfill the necessary prerequisites to prepare themselves to receive Kriya. And anybody who puts out a modicum of energy can come to that, and then we do everything we can to make it possible for them to receive it. And on the other side, there are teachings that are not exactly held back like Kriya initiation is, but are simply not discussed in certain groups. And so we do, within the context of the community that I live in, we try to create certain what we call appropriate satsang groups, which is if you have a class that's open to anybody who just wanders in, and people come in at all different levels of knowledge, lack of it, commitment, attunement, understanding, you can't talk in the same way about what it means to be a disciple. And even when people have just been initiated, you can't talk in the same way as you can talk to a group of people who have been involved long enough to have been tested and passed through levels within themselves of their own commitment to know where they stand. That group can talk to each other and be spoken to in a completely different way than everybody who just wanders in off the street. So it's the same. It's out of respect for those who have just wandered in, and it's also as a service to those who have been involved more deeply, that we do make a few games. But it's all for the sake of the people involved. Swami Ananda was, sometimes, he was so conscious of everybody's vibrations that if you really wanted him to be able to talk freely, sometimes you had to close a few gates. Otherwise, he simply wouldn't speak because he was so sensitive to everybody's energy. That's why he never encouraged parents to bring their children on the theory that it would help their children to be sitting there. Because when there were children in the room, they demanded something else from them. It was hard to speak because their minds were different. He was happy to talk to children, but he preferred to talk to children when this was children. Otherwise, except with few exceptions. Carlton Schreiner's son started coming to Swami's classes when he was about 8. And he just would sit in the front row spiritually knew it for years, 8, 9, 10. He was more attentive, and I think he got more out of it than many of the adults. He grew up he went into the Esoteric monastery for 15 years. It was just who he was. But other children are just... they don't want to be there, and their parents are jabbing them in the ribs the whole time. It's just a nightmare.
I think that's my list.
Good list.
Thanks. Made myself.
We've officially passed our time, but since everybody almost lives in this house, does anyone else have anything to say to Zeb's list? Because all of you, as I said, got lots of experience. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on Joe?
No, I think all those questions, some of those questions I hadn't even given that deep thought to. Yeah, so it was really good. I think it answered a lot. Well, it answered a lot for me that I didn't even know I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Yeah.
It's always interesting. Well, do you want to give us another song? Do you have
Sure.
another song to give us?
I think we might.
Do you have a
Kavita has one class.
What would you like to hear?
Jim Brown.
Sure.
Okay.
You got it? Do you want to
Play.
You'll be close enough.
You know the hard part.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Keep a level head, boys, and preach the lighter news. Don't disappoint the gentlefolk. Our church needs better pews. Jim Brown was hired to clean the church. All week he kept it fair. That Sunday with his family he came to worship there. That Sunday with his family he came to worship there. Oh no, poor Jim, that may not be, for then there'd be a war. Our congregation are all white, and you know what you are. Our congregation are all white, and you know what you are. Back home Jim Brown knelt by his bed and wept till eyes grew dim. That night his room became a shrine, for Jesus came to him. That night his room became a shrine, for Jesus came to him. He said, "My child, don't feel so sad. For 20 years I too have tried to enter that very church with no more luck than you. Have tried to enter that very church with no more luck than you. But keep a level head, boys, and preach the lighter news. Don't disappoint the gentlefolk. Our church needs better pews."
You do that very well.
Good question. It's funny in a way. That song does tie in with our discussion.
Yeah, it does actually. Swami must have been amused when he wrote that one.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can hear him chuckling. The song he wrote, what's the one, you know, I've been wandering.
One day when I was wandering.
Alone upon,
Yeah.
how-
Alone upon.
believe.
Anyway, it's a dismal song.
It's a dismal song. For joy he gave not first, you know, this for joy he thought these meadows would give to be his own, but joy he gave not first to them, and
Yeah.
joy he's never known. And it goes through,
Everything's dying.
everything's dying, the cattle are
Yeah.
dying, the animals are dying, the
The
wife
dog.
has died, the dog has died. It's just this dismal
The dog
song.
howls by the bed.
So I
And
was
then
saying,
run off with your pickup truck.
so I was in the middle of writing and he began to laugh. It just, the song just came to him. It's a haunting sort of song, but it's just dismal, especially when the dog howls by the bed of the poor dead wife. It's just, it's such a miserable song. He said, I couldn't sing it without laughing. It's just, how bad can it be?
I mean, it has a deep message,
It has a very deep
which
message.
is that unless you give to life first, you know,
It just-
and only want it for yourself, it'll just die all around you.
But it really is like a country
It's
western
gruesome
song where
song.
just everything that can go wrong goes wrong.
It's funny.
Every so often, I've heard, I just listen to it and it's a beautiful melody and it's a haunting song.
Yeah.
Once I listened to it all the way through and I thought, this is awful. He has another song, Jenny Will Love Me,
Yes.
which is a beautiful melody that he wrote, a Celtic one, and then he put words to it. And again, he said the words just came to him. And it's about this man who entertains this folly that Jenny will actually love him. And he's looking for all these signs that Jenny will love him, and really his case is doomed. It's not a sad song, it's a very cheerful song.
Never actually says it's stupid.
No, he never
I
said
like to think he's correct.
When I told him the flaw in that one was that, Jenny must be a complete idiot because anybody could write and sing such a beautiful song for her. Of course you were taking him.
See, so it'll be fine.
He said, that flaw occurred to me too.
How about that?
We can sing that one.
That's the words that came, so he just took it.
We did practice that one.
Did you want to sing it?
Sure.
You want to sing it? This was Derek Bell, was an Irish harpist, maybe you know him. He was with the group called the Chieftains. He's a disciple of Master and he became friends with Swami, and he just insisted, really, he gave Swami no choice, that Swami write Celtic melodies for him to record. So he wrote the melodies for the instrumental and then some of the
It's in my book.
Actually, I was looking for mine because it had new words in it. Jenny will love me, it's all been foretold. Was not our nag to that blind parson sold? Jenny will love me, it's clear as the day. The heather bloomed early this spring on the brae. Jenny will love me, it's clear as a bell. Omens aplenty the same story tell. Not without reason her cat-colored white crossed over my path in the dark of the night. Jenny will love me, I'm sure of it now. Did she not smile when I gave her that cow? Soon we'll be one like two peas in a pod, envied by men but united by God. Envied by men but united by God. So you got to hear silly songs today.